Dr. Wanida Lewis, welcome to Diaspora Food Stories. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? And thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. I did the long name, but definitely just a joy to speak with you. And we've been in communication for, it's been what, like maybe almost a year, 2 years
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
just connecting with your work there in Ghana. So we're excited to share with our listeners about what you're doing there with Crescendo Foods. So we're going to just follow your journey on this conversation, how you got from the East Coast to West Africa, what you're doing, and then the exciting part is you are launching a culinary cultural exchange program that's going to kick off this summer. So we want to dig a little bit into that. But food scientist by trade. But let's go on back to the very beginning. East Coast, excuse me, East Coast born. Take us home to the East Coast.
Sure. So I am the oldest of two. I have a younger sister. And we were both born in Philadelphia, but raised in South Jersey, Camden, as well as Glassboro, but spent the majority of our life in Glassboro, New Jersey. So if people are familiar with, depending on when you lived in the Philly, Jersey area, some people may know it as Glassboro State University, but a lot of folks know it as Rowan University. So we grew up in a college town. My dad he's retired now, but he's a recreational therapist. My mother was a music teacher, and my mom played a lot of instruments. She was a brass and woodwind specialist. She is one of several musicians in my family. And so I learned how to play the French horn like her and used to compete when I was in high school. So I was trained in that, also played the string bass, played the trumpet. So kind of following in those footsteps of my mom. And then I went to school in the South. So I wanted to always go to an HBCU. And I ended up at St. Augustine's College, now university. And I got there on a music scholarship
Okay.
for the French horn. So I played in the orchestra. I also knew at the time, like, at some point in my life, I want to live outside of the US because prior to going to college, I was able to be in an orchestra. It was all South Jersey. So it was all South Jersey.
All
And we
right.
went to, we went to Italy for 2 weeks. And my dad went with me. He was my chaperone. And it was great. We got a chance to tour Milan all the way down to Rome. And that gave me the first exposure at that time. Yeah, that's probably the earliest I can remember of traveling overseas. And I knew that I wanted to continue that life, somehow, some way. And so I was at an HBCU. I actually majored in chemistry. And that's what I have 2 degrees in chemistry. And it was through my late band director that he told me about there was money for a chemistry, science majors. And at the time, I wanted to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. I really admired Dr. Ben Carson, and I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. And then I got into the lab, and I was like, yeah, this ain't it. I don't want to dissect
How
at
about
all.
that lab?
Yeah, I still kind of hate it. It's funny, but I ended up getting a scholarship to. We all did, it was like a program for HBCU students through the National Science Foundation, and we were mentored for a summer. So I stayed home. Well, I didn't stay home. I didn't go home. I stayed in North Carolina in Raleigh for the summer, and I was connected to a food scientist who happened to be African American. He's also an HBCU grad. And so I said, okay, never heard of food science. I like food. It's cool.
Mhm.
And so I was working with him for the summer on muscadine grapes, created muscadine grape sausage. We did
Ooh,
blackberry picking in Kinston. And it was a whole new world for me. I had never heard of food science
wow.
at all. And I was like, oh, there's even Black people in food science. And
Hmm.
so I was like, this is really cool. Maybe I can get into like wine or something. And it was a fleeting thought at the time. And so I ended up graduating from college, went through all kind of the stereotypical college experiences. Was able to pledge a sorority when I was there, and then, made a lot of friends. And then I decided to go and get my master's. And so by this point in time, I had a really good relationship with my band director because he was always like family. And
Hmm.
so I said to him, oh, I'm looking to get my master's. I didn't know what I wanted to get my master's in at the time, but I was like, maybe chemistry again. And that's what ended up happening. I ended up going to another HBCU. I went to North Carolina Central and did my master's in chemistry. And at that time, I was like, oh, I'll get into drug design. Really kind of liked it. Did a lot of research during the summer. Was working on anti-cancer agents. No, anti-inflammatory agents. That's what it was.
Okay.
And, it came to a point where my project lost funding. So my project, that was it.
Oh.
And the advisor had the time was like, hey, your slate is wiped clean. You can go and be prosperous, or if you want to stay on, you can. And I was like, you know what? This is an opportunity for me to maybe explore. And I was taking an advanced thermodynamics class at the time. Mm-hmm. And we had to pick a project. We had to do like a mock grant or something. And I am not really a wine drinker, mm-hmm. But I said, you know what, it'd be cool if somebody studied the thermodynamics of wine barrels and how it affects red wine. I don't even know where I
was going to say, because that's deep.
Right. To this day, I was like, where did the idea come from? I don't even know. It might have been like a conversation I've had with like friends, like, oh, would it be cool? Because all the friends I had from college, we were all STEM majors because we spent so much time together in undergrad. And then when I got to my master's, it was the exact same thing. And it was mm-hmm. even cooler because at North Carolina Central, you saw a lot more women, mm-hmm. Especially in the chemistry space. When I was at St. Aug, I was the only person in my entire class of 2005. Wow. One of my really good friends was the only person in her class in 2004. And we're still friends to this day. So imagine having, a party of two going into North Carolina Central, and there's like 5 or 6 of y'all.
Right.
So we would talk about all types of crazy things, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? You see all these like really cool, like Black women, like in chemistry. And so, I wanted to have that same kind of sisterhood experience when I, thought about that time getting my PhD. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to medical school. I already knew this. I'm getting my master's. I started doing the calculations, how much money I was going to be in debt. I was like, nah, it's going to take 15 years for me to do this. I was like, it's okay. So I started taking food science classes at the end of my master's, just to see if I liked it. And I loved it. I took a recipe development class. And then I said, I'm going to get my PhD. So I told my mentor from my food science internship, and I even got a publication under him. And I said, I want to do my PhD in food science. So he's like, okay, these are places you need to think about. Applied, and I really wanted to go to UC Davis at the time. Mm-hmm. I even got a chance to explore the campus. Wasn't meant to be. So I ended up going to NC State. And I was like, gosh, I'm still in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. I'm still here. So I literally moved from Raleigh for undergrad to Durham for my master's, moved back to Raleigh for my PhD. Mm-hmm. And I was there for 4.5 years. And I did my PhD on peanuts. Okay. And it was actually looking at anti-inflammatory properties of the skin, which, I mentioned earlier in my first master's project was working on anti-inflammatory agents. Mm-hmm. So now I'm taking that mindset and going over here to thinking about food. And so just from there, I ended up living in North Carolina. I graduated in officially 2013. And then I was applying for jobs, and I ended up going to work in the food industry.
Okay. So it all worked out. Now, along the way, did your parents have any expectations? I mean, you wanted to be a nurse, and then you're changing. Was there or were they supportive all the way?
They've always been supportive. For me, I'm very, 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 very blessed. Mm-hmm. My parents are both creatives. I mean, my mom's a music teacher, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they were like, oh, you want to be a medical doctor? Okay, cool. You want to do, you want to be a neurosurgeon? Great. And it's so funny because we had this conversation last summer when they came to visit Ghana for the first time. And my mom and my dad were like, listen, our expectation was, okay, you guys go to college. Mm-hmm. Okay, you get your master's degree. Okay, fine. Great. We love it. We love to see it. And then they're like, then you decided, oh, I want to get my PhD. And they're like, okay. Sure, if that's what you want to do. It's your world. We're just living in it. So they're like, okay, now we got a doctor. All right. And I was like, yeah. And then my mom was like, then you said I want to move to Ghana. And you're like, what? So there's more. Oh, so, they've always been supportive. I mean, my sister, on the other hand, she's an architect. Okay. So we're on two
pretty big. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're on two, and she actually went to an all-girls school. My sister went to Smith College. So two sides of the spectrum, but definitely as far as anything that my parents have been subjected to so many different things over the course of my sister and I, what we've done in our careers. I mean, I worked on muscadine grape sausages. I came and I brought it home and I was like, you guys got to try this. And I'm like, sure. Okay. It's purple.
Yeah.
All right. So, and even with me moving, I mean, I'm very, very blessed. I'm just very thankful that I've have
Yeah.
open-minded parents. I mean, would they love if I lived back in the States? Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's every parent. It's not to be expected, but I definitely will say that it is something that they love to talk about in common conversation. Oh yeah, my daughter lives in West Africa. Like,
I
oh
love it.
yeah.
That was
you
wonderful.
know,
I mean, it just, seemed like you had such a strong foundation that they just put those seeds in you and to you and your sister, and you guys are just flourishing, which I love. And one of the things is we feature you in our print issue, you even talked about just the harmony between the different spiritual practices of your
right.
parents, right?
Yeah.
And how that, just contribute to who you are. So I just think it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because now that I've gotten older, so in the print issue, I said, my dad's Buddhist, my mom identifies as Christian, and as I've gotten older, I've met a lot more Black Buddhists, which
Hmm.
is so interesting because I didn't. I think also too, my parents didn't. I mean, at least from what I recall from my own, I guess, experiences, that I never felt like, oh, this is Auntie such and such, and they're a Buddhist, and
Right.
they're Christian. It was never. We never paid attention to that. I mean, we just had a family friend pass away. I had no idea for years that she was one of my dad's like was in my dad's like Buddhist group. I had no idea. She was just Auntie. So
Mhm.
like didn't even think about it. And so I think too, it does make us more accepting,
Right.
for sure. And I'm very thankful for that. And probably has led to me also being a yoga teacher. So in a way, because you see a lot of those similarities,
Right.
and there's not that much of a parallel between Buddhism and Christianity. And I'm just thankful that, I can see that. And so when I meet friends who may have had a Buddhist parent, or they also practice Buddhism, or they learn from their parent, it's always something, it's like another level of connection that it's very different from, I think, my friends who grew up in a church setting. It's
Mhm.
very, very different. And it's always a really cool thing to connect on. So yeah, I'm very, very blessed in that arena as well.
Wonderful. So food science is coming into play more and more in your career. Did you have any, let's start to talk about what was the next step? What did you think you wanted to do? Now, you're earning this degree, this doctorate degree. Was there any inkling of what you wanted to do? Did you want to stay more in research, or did you know you wanted to be more out in the field?
Neither. At the time, I thought I could just be a manager at Chick-fil-A because I was tired.
I know
Um,
you were.
I was like, I'm tired of this. I can't do it. I actually wanted to be in an impact setting. That was
Okay.
what was important to me. So I knew that research was not my thing, to an extent. I mean, there are perks of being a food science, especially in school. I mean, you
Mhm.
usually don't have to pay for food that much.
Mhm.
The amount of giveaways we used to have was really cool. I knew I didn't want to teach. I think that was also just because my mom, being an educator, my aunties are all educators, and
Mhm.
they're like, "Don't do it. Like, it's not worth it."
Save
So
yourself.
yeah, they're like, "Save yourself. Don't do it." And I said if I went to academia, it would be more on a higher, like kind of on the administrative path.
Okay.
That would be kind of more so what I thought about. And then, or you do government. But I didn't know exactly because I didn't have a really good example of
Right.
what it looked like to work in government. Had no idea. And so when I was getting ready to graduate, I had applied for, there was a policy fellowship called AAAS. It's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I knew I wanted to apply for that because I had a soror at the time who was a AAAS fellow. She was my mentor when I was in undergrad. She said be my chemistry tutor, and she had talked about applying for AAAS. And she worked for I think NIH because she's still there. She worked
Okay.
for NIH, and so she just talked about how she was in policy. And I said, okay. I understood policy because when I was in high school, I was a board of ed student representative. So I understood the policy realm very well. I also created a diversity policy board when I was at NC State because we had a diversity issue in the food science department. And then I was also I was on a couple different boards when I was in grad school. So I had a lot of experience of understanding, what are the procedures and protocols of being able to do these things. And then having my mother being an educator,
Right.
and really, making this transition of being more of a traveling instrumental music teacher. She made that transition from there and going into being at one school, learning how to put together a curriculum, how to teach, kids from, that she sees the same kids all year long, in the same setting and all these things. So I'm pretty good at being being agile. And my dad, same way, my dad had changed careers a few times. And so I said, okay, let's see how this works. How does food policy work?
Right.
And I did not get a chance to apply for AAAS. And because I had to change my dissertation date. So
Oh,
I was very upset and I was like, okay. So what do? I am a broke graduate student. What do broke graduate students do? We go to places that have high returns. So I went and worked in industry. I worked
okay.
in the private sector for 3.5 years. I felt very broke.
Okay.
Even though they're like, oh, they paid for somebody to come and pack you up, ship you all the way there. And I noticed that at that point in time, during my time in industry, that call for wanting to do a social impact was coming again. So I knew that at some point in time within the food science space that I would be in some type of social impact, whether it's policy. And I don't get married to an idea very long. I'm like, hey, I know I want to do this, but I'm also okay with changing my mind and pivoting and going somewhere else.
Right, right. So then let's talk about your first time in Africa and then what led you to eventually set up in Ghana specifically.
Sure. So actually, when I was in grad school, my cousin has my dad's cousin. Her husband is Ghanaian,
Okay.
and he was a professor, and so I used to go there during breaks because he taught at North Carolina A&T.
Okay.
Their daughter, we're a year apart, so I'm older. They would take her to Ghana, throughout her life. And I threw like an adult temper tantrum. I was like, y'all never take me to Ghana. You take all friends, but I'm never invited. And so they said, okay, you can go when you graduate from your PhD program. It happened to be that my cousin and I actually graduated the same year. That's only happened like twice. We got our master's at the same time, and then we got our PhD at the same time. And so I said, okay. So it didn't happen. When I was at General Mills, because that's where I worked
Mhm.
at the time, I tried to get into the policy space and it didn't quite work out through the General Mills route. But I had an opportunity to apply. A sorority sister of mine who I used to be a running buddy with, because I was just a distance runner at one point.
Mhm.
She nominated me for she voluntold me that she was nominating me for a policy fellowship. And it was for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And so it only take like 75 Americans. So I'm going up against Congress people, CEOs. I mean, you're
Wow.
meeting like sometimes the president of like Denmark, because they're all in this like very, very small group of policymakers who want to work on improving transatlantic relationships. I got it. So I went to Europe for a year.
Okay.
I mean, not
Nice.
for a year, sorry, for a month. I wish. I went to Europe for a month, and then I realized that, okay, I want to move into policy. I ended up applying for AAAS because at this point now I have graduated, got
Mhm.
in, and said I wanted to work for more of the international development space. Actually, what was really more of my bread and butter was working in diplomacy. So I ended up working at the US Department of State, and I worked in women in ag. And from there, I was given the task of, you have women in ag, you can do whatever you want. And I thought about with food science, there aren't a lot of us, Black women or just with people of color in these spaces. What would it, and we're never included in these policy talks,
Right.
which is on a local level in the US, definitely on federal level. And so imagine how it is on an international level. So talking to my boss at the time, I was working on South Central Asian issues. So I wanted to go to India. And she said to me, why don't you think about going to the continent?
Mm.
They've been passing a bunch of biotech laws. Think about it.
Mhm.
So I wrote a concept note, sent it out to all the embassies based in Africa, and the first embassy that was interested was Ethiopia.
Okay.
The next one was Ghana. The third one was South Africa, and then Liberia. And
Okay.
so I traveled to Ethiopia in November, or is it October 2017.
Okay.
I was there for a week, and we put together this one-day workshop with African women in biotech that had other African women being the speakers, talking about how gender needs to be included, but also what is their work in biotechnology, so that they were all abreast. So it was creating a community.
Nice.
And then I ended up going to Ghana. They loved the work that I did in Ghana for that week, that they asked me to come back and live there for 3 months. So I moved to Ghana in 2018, lived there for 3 months, and then the rest is history.
Wow.